Hello and welcome to the Spiritually Incorrect podcast with me, your host, Shiv Sengupta. For those who are not familiar with me, I'm the author of the Advaitaholics Anonymous books, Sobering Insights for Spiritual Addicts, and A Manifesto for Spiritual Anarchy, published by New Serum Press. They're available through Amazon in Kindle and paperback formats, and you can find them by clicking the links in the description below. However, my purpose with the Spiritually Incorrect podcast series is to connect and engage with other writers, thinkers, and teachers in the industry who don't necessarily fall into the traditional guru stereotype. The idea is to explore some of the topics I cover in my books beyond the realm of my own opinions on the matter. So with that being said, my guest on today's podcast is Benjamin Smythe. Now, Ben and I decided to have this conversation off camera for reasons that we will explore through the course of our conversation. But personally, this format only helped enhance the intimacy of what has possibly been my favorite podcast so far. That's exactly it. Like when, some of my readers will reach out to me and they'll say, hey, this one thing you said in this one article, this one line, this one line, this one quote, it did something. To me, it's just another sentence among thousands, and not even thousands, fucking millions of sentences that I write on that page, right?
Right.
Like, I don't know, I've written like 600 plus essays. And to me, all those sentences are equally valid. They're just stuff I'm spewing out. My brain is just thinking of, and I'm kind of channeling and typing it out on the computer. Half the time, I don't know, what I intend to say. And they'll come back to me and say, that one sentence was so significant. It came at the right time. And it was like my brain was ready to hear just that sentence.
Mm.
I can't claim ownership of that. Like, how could I possibly know, right?
Right. No, absolutely. It's like a vocabularic house of cards, and you just happen to pull the right card at the right moment, and it's just pure algorithmic chance in a way.
Well, and that's it. And so let me ask you this, because before I started recording, we were talking about how something you said to me 10 years ago had that very same triggering effect, like a positive trigger, right?
Mm.
And we know that these triggers exist. We know that we're able to trigger each other in this way, trigger other human beings this way. We just happen to be the right person in the right moment at the right time for that person.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
But how can you then create an identity around it? Because I think that's a lot of what the spiritual industry becomes about. It becomes about, look, I can actually be that right person in the right moment at the right time all the time.
It's like it's like you try to become a Swiss Army knife and you try to guess all your own. It's like you try to guess all your own functions ahead of time before you're even in use. Like it's impossible. It's impossible.
That's a brilliant analogy. You try to be a spiritual Swiss Army knife, right?
Oh, I need the toothpick now. No, I need the scissors. No, I'm going to use, it's like, I don't know until I'm in the flow of the thing, what's going to happen. But I agree with you. You can't take, it's impossible to take credit for things that are bigger than me. Like I didn't invent the language. I found the language after I was born and it's in the shape it's in. And I didn't invent the reaction. I didn't invent the world that I react to either. Like the spiritual circus is there. So it's like, oh, wow, I can react to it. I can also ignore it. I can join in it. I can, there's a lot of different options. And it's just sort of funny that to try to build an identity around being able to steer it feels not shady, but just sort of like curious. Like who can really do that well? And is anyone doing it well, or is everyone doing it relatively poorly, and we just need to call that out in some way?
Well, this seems to be the case for spiritual transmission, right? In podcast number, I think number 2, I was talking to Tom Thompson, and Tom Thompson's a great guy. I really enjoyed talking to him. He comes from a bit more of that traditional spiritual background. He's been around the block. He's met a lot of these spiritual teachers from, even like the 60s and 70s. And he narrated a story about, how he used to hang out with Anandamayi Ma. She was a spiritual teacher in India and like a very well-known mystic and all of that. And he told me this story about how this one time, she was very casual in her relationship with her students. And he had come over and they were talking about a phone call or something. And this one look she gave him, or this one sentence she said, I can't quite remember the incident exactly. And basically the whole view opened up for him, and he felt the bottom drop out of him. And he attributed that experience to her presence or what she said and all of that. So I'm not trying to discount any of that. I'm not discounting that he experienced that and any of that happened. But the correlation and causation thing is
Right.
always something, just because two things happen at the same time, attributing cause to the person and then saying this is a person who can cause such things consistently for people is
Right.
where I think a lot of the misunderstanding happens, right?
Well, yeah, and also like we were just saying about a sentence, you come across a sentence and the sentence does something to the house of cards that you had going on. I wonder in that moment for him and for her, if there's a mirror neuron house of cards. And so there's something that happens in the mirror neurons that we don't really understand. But when someone gives us the right look at the right time, it's just like the right sentence at the right time. And the same kind of house of cards can fall apart. But I don't think I don't think it's transmission in any intentional way, but I don't also say that it might just be something that faces can do when faces are aware of faces. I don't actually know.
Well, you're right, because language is so much more than just the words, right? There's the body language, the expression,
Right.
all of that.
Right. And
And so
the face when I see it, it's inside me. I mean, it's inside my actual physiology. In some partial way, the face is recognized inside the brain. And so that's what I mean by like, I don't know if they're any different, the sentence house of cards and the mirror neuron house of cards.
Well, I will say this: when you and I met 10 years ago, and I'll give a little bit of context to people listening to this. 10 years ago, I was sort of getting ready to go to the Science and Non-Duality Conference. And I reached out to you because I knew you had attended, I think the year previous or something like that. You'd gone and spoken at that conference.
No, I was going to, but I never made it.
But you never made it. That's right. That's right.
Right.
And I was expressing to you sort of my little bit of conflict and doubt around that. And when we met, I feel like it was right before the day I went and spoke there.
Yep.
And you had mentioned that the whole thing was a bit of a spiritual circus, and that really resonated with me at the time. But the one memory and impression I was left with after we met is your charisma. You had this intense energy about you. All right. And this is going to lead us to our conversation about your bipolar condition, because that kind of energy, I mean, now looking back, maybe you were potentially going through a manic phase, but man, the positivity was absolutely exploding out of you to the point where it was like almost hard to take in, because you're not encountering that kind of a sort of deluge of positivity coming out of a person, but your personality was very positive and intense. And that left me with two impressions after we departed and said goodbye to each other. One was the feeling of being still under hypnotic trance of that charisma. Okay, it took a good 2 or 3 hours to wear off. And so I can see the impact. And you may not even know you had that impact, right? But that was one. The other was a sense of disappointment, because I felt like I wanted to connect with the real Ben. I don't
Right.
know how you would view that from the way that played out for you.
Well, for me at that time, I was doing the sign almost every day. And so the feeling of your perfect reality was so big because it was atomic. Like and I still feel this, the atomic configuration of you and the atomic configuration of me, in addition to the atomic configuration of the universe, has no alternative. So right now, this is that same perfection. And at the time, I was just unafraid of everyone because all I was seeing was that. And so seemingly that comes across as high personality, big charisma, whatever. But I remember sitting there looking at you and feeling like the same kind of perfection feeling. And that was such a big state I was in at that time. And it's never really changed. I changed. But the sense of that is still the same. Like I'm looking at the window and it's the same as looking at you that day. Like it's the same kind of, all the atoms are arranged perfectly and I'm just here to witness it. But the second part you said is very true, which is I was inside of a characterization of myself that was true for me, but also a part of me and a side of me, an addition to me. And what wasn't clear was what was underneath all of that charisma, which was pain and suffering, anger, misery, pessimism, frustration with reality, frustration with my life. And all of those things just slowly bubbled and came out later as time went on. And and I had to figure out how to wrestle with that and ultimately failed in a good way that led to medication and some kind of stability within my situation that I have now, which has been sort of the same for 3.5 years now. But I think you're right. The real person, the real Ben, or the real whoever we are. I think of the movie Inside Out a lot, the Pixar movie where sadness plays the key in the wisdom. And I think the real person is the one who, after the charisma wears off, is there when the head hits the pillow at night. And it's not planning its next charismatic moment, and it's not dreaming of when it was charismatic, but it's there in the sadness of not being able to maintain its own self. For me, it's like I can't maintain that kind of charisma. And there's a melancholy there that I can really trust now, but I didn't know how to trust then.
Well, and this is why, doing this podcast with you felt so important to me because for me, the spiritual industry has become all about flash and the manifestation of that charisma as if that is the reality of a person.
Right.
I can't even imagine the toll it takes on a lot of these spiritual teachers to keep that up, man.
Oh, totally.
It's not natural, right?
Well, it's impossible.
It's impossible. Most regular people just get to be who they are. They get to have spaz out moments. They get to have, glorious moments, and it's all part and parcel of their day. I can be a total asshole at home, and then my kids will tell me, "Dad, you need to shape up," and I'm like, "Oh fuck, I've got to, do better next time," or whatever it is, right?
Right.
But when you're in that role, you can't do any of that. And I feel what that does is it just takes all the substance out of anything we have to offer people, because people are in that pain. People are in that suffering. And what they need to see is examples of people like yourself, in my opinion, where you can, as you said, look out the window, see that perfection still the same way you saw it 10 years ago.
Right.
And yet
be depressed,
feel melancholy, feel depressed, feel all of that. Why can't they coexist?
Yeah, well, they do. I think if you become a cliche of yourself, this comes down to the industry of hope. I mean, spiritual circus / industry of hope. If you're making yourself into your own commodity, it's very invariable, I think, and I've seen it relatively from an outsider perspective, that you're going to become a cliche of yourself, and you're going to lose out on the richness of the experience because you're maintaining a position that allows for trade. So killing the trade becomes a part of, I think, I can't say it for anyone else, but for me, it was a part of really making sure that I keep going, so to speak. Like if you think of the spiritual search as a dance between birth and death, it's easy to stop somewhere along the way and actually arrested development in a way. Like I'm missing out on life by becoming the you're perfect guy. I'm missing out on life by becoming the manic guy in the videos only. I'm missing out on life, really missing out on life, if I think I can help people besides just telling the truth about who I am and how I feel. You know, like there's a way to really get locked into a box. I remember, and it doesn't matter who it is, but I remember someone saying, so-and-so popular teacher used to meet with people after the groups, and he got so big that he couldn't do that anymore. And that feels like right then you're in cardboard cutout mode. Now you're just in operating the machine mode. And there's a danger to that because you lose the intimacy of the reality. So I wish everyone in the world, the ability to actually relax the character they're playing for the money, the character they're playing as the commodity, the character they're playing to maintain the structure they've built. Like, goodness gracious, I hope everyone can actually relax that character, because it's so stressful to maintain it ultimately for a shallow reason, which is
See,
in love and approval or whatever it is.
yeah, from a practical standpoint, like for example, I have a 9 to 5 job in which I need to be a cardboard cutout, because if I'm the totality of shit, it's going to fucking blow people's minds. I'm not going to know what to do about it. Right? I got to dumb myself. I'm not being egotistical about it, but literally I have to show a very narrow facet of myself that is relevant to the work that we do.
Totally.
Limit all other inputs. And so be that, in a sense, that cardboard cutout. But that doesn't really cause me much angst, because I know why I'm doing it. It's purely a utilitarian purpose. It's transactional. It's a limited time frame a day. It serves a very sort of purpose. It gets food on my table, helps me pay my rent, all of this shit. So I don't even think about it. It doesn't bother me. But when it comes to things like this, like the spiritual industry, it seems like there's a sense of self infused into that phenomenon of being a cardboard cutout, right? Like being the I'm perfect guy. Tell me, like, at what point did you say, I'm so perfect that I need to stop being this I'm perfect guy, right? Because you're holding the sign for the world, for them to understand their perfection, and ironically in it losing something of yourself, right?
Absolutely right. I met a man once. He said, you work so hard to find your freedom and you're losing it trying to share it. And that was such a beautiful line. He was Israeli, and the Israelis can tell the truth straight up. So I was just like, thank you, man. That was a very helpful thing for me to hear. But the last time I held the sign was 2018. And I remember standing there being like, this guy is done. Like, this is done. This is all done. And I have one in the closet. I mean, I made it one day when I was here, and I thought, oh, I'll go out and I'll just, get a hit of whatever that is. And I still haven't touched it, and I don't think I will. And I think it's so beautiful to let it all just disappear. But I don't, that was the moment. Well, yeah, I had a psychotic episode around 2014. And since then, it was kind of like I became less reliable to myself, and I became less trusting of what my intentions were. So I slowly was like, what am I doing? Like, in one way, there was a moment where it became too big for me to handle. Like, I got a lot of interesting feedback and a lot of interest in having me travel and having me go here and there and there and that. And I was like, oh my God, I'm only one person. I can't handle this. And so that kind of collapsed. And then I was in Mexico City visiting someone, and I was able to stay, and it was a beautiful little family. And I was wandering around Mexico with the sign by myself, and I was just like, I think I'm just going to go work somewhere and do something completely different, because I'm starting to feel the like disinterest in my own life. And so then I went and worked at a bike shop, San Francisco Bicycle Rentals in San Francisco, with an awesome human named Rob Schwartz and a whole crew of really great people. And I just rented bikes to tourists for a year. And then I got hit by a car, and I ended up firing myself from that job because I was no longer interested immediately after getting hit by the car. And then I just kind of was lost. And I think I stayed lost in a very strange way for 2 or 3 years, until I ended up under a bridge for a little while, and I was having a lot of psychosis. And then I just asked my family to help me, because I didn't know where I was going to end up, but I was out on the street. And they helped me, and I got clean and sober, and everything's been really beautiful since then, in a certain way. Boring in another way. If I'm real honest, it's like life is pretty boring now compared to the memories I have of my other life. But it's also much more stable, and I feel much more connected to how I really feel. And I don't feel like I have to present myself. Like I don't have to be anybody. And that feels more free than anything I've felt.
And see, if you wanted to really capitalize on this, I mean, this is the perfect backstory, man, for your next level of enlightenment, right? Like this, you could, in this industry, you could be reinventing yourself way better than Jeff Foss or any of these people are, because anything bad that happens then becomes like the next like fuel for elevating that persona. So it's beautiful that you're just sort of being the guy you are.
Well, right, but also like there's no next level. Like there's no interest. The idea that I could participate in a way now feels like ridiculous and also exhausting to even think about. Like I can't imagine doing a meeting, I can't imagine traveling, like I can't imagine doing any of that anymore. Like it just feels like, why would I even bother? That doesn't make any sense. The world doesn't need me.
So explain that sentence to me. When you say the world doesn't need me, what do you mean by
that? I used to believe that there was something to really help with.
Sure.
And I don't really believe that anymore. I think there's so many amazing young people that are doing all kinds of great work in the world as musicians and artists and thinkers. And, it's all going on. And if I die right now, it's like, it's all going on just as well. It's not dependent on me in the way that when I originally started holding the sign, I think I was trying to cure a sadness in me and a sadness in the world and kind of give everyone a boost. And it all had its own life in another way. Like I can't take credit for it, but I think I had an intention anyway to be of service. And now it's like, oh, if I apologize once in the day for some way I was acting, then that's success. At this point, like if I don't get into an argument with somebody, if I'm not short with somebody, or I'm not really worried about the world at this point. It's not something I can do much about other than wish everyone well and manage my own little life.
Yeah, when I began writing on Vitaholics Anonymous, people would ask me, why are you writing? Are you trying to help people or trying to save seekers? I'm like, no. To be honest with you, the only reason I write is purely selfish reasons. It's the only reason I have for doing anything. It's purely selfish. It's selfish. I don't have a charitable bone in my body. I'm not afraid to admit that. Right. And this idea of doing something to better someone else's life, a lot of that happens, but I think that happens organically. But intending to do that, and building some sort of a mission around it, I think eventually becomes counterproductive. And I think that's one of the flaws I see with this industry is that do good intention. Often, they say the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Inevitably, you're going to end up in a place where it kind of looks like hell. The guiding factor that every organism on the planet is evolutionarily designed to have is self-interest. And I think it was Robert Oppenheimer who said, I may be misquoting him, but it was either him or I can't remember who else might have said it, but he said, if the world is going down the drain, the only hope of saving it is to stop trying to fix it. Right?
Right.
The system will self-correct itself, but this idea that we need to actively do something to fix, I think this is a very sort of Western colonialist mindset that the whole world has eventually inherited as part of our sort of globalized economy. But if we look into indigenous cultures, this idea of broken things remaining broken and that being part of the bigger picture was very much like showing some acceptance around that rather than actively trying to do something about it.
Yeah. It's so funny because I think I always just wanted to fix me and I couldn't. And then that became the kind of saving grace of just like, no, you can't. Like I need a lot more help than I thought I needed. And the continuation of the symptomatic reality of bipolar, it's like, oh, I was really like, I didn't want to be alive on Friday, and Saturday. And now I'm like, okay, it's fine. It's clearing up and I know it'll clear up. I know not to do anything. I know don't kill myself, just stay alive, go to sleep more, sleep whatever. Go to the group. I go to a great group and National Alliance for Mental Illness, NAMI. They're really helpful. And I talk with other people who are in similar peer-like conditions. And, it's just, I know to do my things, but I just was trying to fix me. I was in a lot of pain and anger and suffering. And and it's in another way, I was optimistic that it was possible. You know, I wasn't just miserable. I was also like really, like you said, like I was charismatic and I was blissed out and I was psyched to be feeling helpful. And I was really, oh, cool. I'm not just a useless piece of garbage, you know, and that all was true too. So it's not so black and white, but at this point it's like the quieter part of me wants to live my life. And I just did a podcast over at the Discarded Compass, and I was like, can you take my email down? Because I started to get emails and I was like, oh my God, I don't want to talk to people. Like I don't actually want to be useful right now. And maybe ever. I don't know the future. I can't say the future ever.
Well, you know that saying where they say, hell is other people?
Yeah, well, I think that's Sartre, right? And then Wittgenstein said, hell is yourself.
Right. Well, and that's interesting because that hell that is yourself
Yeah.
is the self that is related to other people. This is what I found.
Oh, cool.
They're two sides of the same statement, the same coin, those two statements. And I was thinking about this the other day, is when I'm out in nature, I have nobody to relate to, that I have no sort of persona or personality to keep up. There's no searching for perfection there. There's no need for it because nature accepts me as I am. If I'm fucking wounded or if I'm not, if I'm hungry, if I'm fulfilled, it doesn't matter if I'm happy or sad. Nature accepts me as I am. You know, there's no pressure from it whatsoever to change what I am.
Right.
But in society, there is always that pressure. And I want to come back to the bipolar thing because I was reading an article quite some time ago where they're talking about successful people, you know, whether they be in the entertainment industry or corporate world, a number of them are bipolar. And the reason they're successful is because they're able to, when they're manic, in their manic phase, they're able to be highly productive and effective.
Yep.
But it's almost as if our culture is bipolar by nature. And so it aggravates or exacerbates that tendency within people. So there are some people who are clearly diagnosed bipolar as you are. But I think everyone has different shades of bipolarity within themselves, right? I wonder, when you reflect now to when you were actively engaged in that whole spiritual culture versus now when you're sort of in retreat and in your sort of own space, do you feel there's a difference between how that bipolar tendency manifests within yourself?
Well, there's also sobriety now, so it's very different in that when I would get depressed, I would just smoke or drink. And now the depression is just, I have to just feel it. And so like the other day, it's rare. I have bipolar 1. There's two kinds. One is depressant heavy and the other is manic heavy. So I have the manic heavy version. I'm more likely to want to run through the streets naked than I am to sit in the room and want to be, you know, sad. So I have to like manage all of that. I take an antipsychotic and it works really well. I'm totally fine. I have no trouble with the law. I have no trouble with hospitals. And that's the best I can hope for. I'm not homeless. And my family is beautifully caring for me in that way. And I'm able to actually care for them in a different way because they're aging. And it's really awesome. There's a mutual like exchange going on. But at the thing about bipolar that's difficult if you don't have it is for that time when you're really productive, when that shuts off, one, you don't do anything to shut that off. And two, you forget who was capable of being that productive. And like, let's say I read 5 books in 3 weeks and I wrote this many pages and I did all this stuff. Not only do you want to destroy it, you destroy it, but you don't even remember what you just did. So it's like you can imagine going to school and you study for 3 months and then all of a sudden you forget everything that just happened. And you're a completely different character and there's no sense of interest in whatever you were just obsessed about. There's no sense of interest in whatever you were just passionate about. And it is actually like baffling that it even happened. And the funny side about depression is you never feel like you're going to get that back. And then in the same flip of a switch, all that obsessive energy comes back, all that capability, productivity. I call it Superman and kryptonite. I mean, you're kryptonite and then you're Superman, then you're kryptonite and then you're Superman, and it's all chemical. There's no causal factor for it beyond some mystery of the brain. And the loss of all that productivity and the loss of all that interest is a real deep mourning every time. Every time. And it's a shock every time. Like it's been happening to me since I was in my 20s, and it's a shock. It happened recently. It's a shock. Where did my interest go? Where did my curiosity go? Why do I suddenly not want to exist? What's going on? You know, it's a real deep loss of something that feels so possible. And then it comes back, and it comes back in a different flavor. Like I can never really read the same book again. I have to go find another book I'm going to be interested in. Or in December, I was like a Christian preacher for 3 weeks. This is where psychosis comes in. Like I was basically reading the Bible and preaching to the souls in hell every morning. I was legitimately doing it. I wasn't just characterizing it. I was playing out this thing that I thought would be the ultimate expression of Christian preaching, which was save the souls that are trapped in hell, and then you would absolutely empty hell itself. And I was inside of this thought process, and it was all just happening in my room by myself. And then it disappears. By Christmas, it was gone. I was using a Scottish voice. I wasn't actually myself. I was somewhat a version of Alistair Begg and this other preacher that I saw. I mean, it was like something happens in a manic state where you absorb the world in a way that's impossible in any other state. And you're able to actually transform it artistically and playfully. And I assume, like you said, that there are people who can do this intentionally and they can do it well. I imagine that the entertainment industry is full of people like this, but I'm not one of those people. It happens to me, and then I'm shocked when it's over. And it's just like
in the midst of one of these manic episodes, is there any part of your awareness that's aware the way you are right now, somewhat objectively aware sitting on the outside watching this?
No, it's like I'm suddenly, no, it's not like, oh, I'm in a manic episode. Okay, well, this will pass. It's like, oh, fuck. Yeah, no, it's like all of a sudden, like if you take a good, strong amount of drugs, you're on the adventure of the drug. Yeah. I'm on the adventure of the mania. And just like the reverse, I'm now in the adventure, and I try to keep that perspective of the depression. Weirdly, the depression is easier to recognize than the mania. The mania always feels like, oh, good, I'm myself. And it's like, that's not me either. But depression I can recognize and just don't do anything harmful to myself.
So where along this path, what is the connection between your bipolar condition and your interest in Buddhism? Because I know you've talked a lot in the past about Buddhism.
Yeah.
And you can tell by the way you talk about it that the Buddhist teachings appeal to you, because they're somewhat prescriptive, and I think they provide structure.
Yep.
B, because they're simple. They're
Yep.
not very heady and complicated philosophies.
Totally.
And C, because they seem to promise equanimity, which is something your brain has no access to.
Right. Well said. Yeah, no, that's all really well said. I mean, for me, the thing that saved me in my first psychotic episode was Zazen. So I have a very respectful reverence for the simplicity of Zazen, and then basically anicca, nada dukkha. Like those three concepts, and sitting there staring at the wall, there's a consistency within them that like you just said, it provides me with a stability that I don't otherwise have. But I don't fundamentally believe in afterlives or multiple lives, or like when it comes to the Hindu Buddhist cosmology, that's not really my thing. It's just these 3 pieces or 4 pieces from Buddhism have always been helpful and continue to be helpful to this day. Like I sat this morning, and it just is a feature of my coping skills, is what we say in mental health world. Like I have coping skills, and anicca, nada dukkha, and Zazen are my coping skills. But that's the extent of Buddhism at this point in my life. I mean, I've done some more research, but that's the extent of it that I would say I utilize.
And that's always been my sort of support of Buddhism, or pretty much any spiritual teaching, it helps people cope with things, coping strategies, which is great. I think everybody needs some kind of coping strategy in their life.
I agree.
Where I tend to deviate with most of these philosophies and teachings is in their promise of some sort of superior state that one can reach and achieve.
Right.
And I'm curious, the Buddha talks about reaching the state of equanimity where suffering no longer affects you psychologically. Yep. And do you think that's practically possible?
Not for me, because I don't have chemical control over my mindset. My mind.
Who does have?
Well, this is the thing. I can't speak to that because I can't imagine what it feels like to be you. So qualia, like if we play with qualia in the consciousness qualia conversation,
Mhm.
I have no access to qualia for any other brain whatsoever. So I can't even talk about it. I can absolutely imagine someone who could achieve equanimity. I can imagine it, but that doesn't mean it's real. I just can imagine it. But I know it's not me because of the way my brain flips and flops, says the brain.
Yeah, and you know, like people, when I talk to people and they go, "Oh, look at Eckhart Tolle. He's he's look at his equanimity. He's like always this calm, peaceful, you know, personality." And I'm like, "Well, how do you know he wasn't like that before his so-called enlightenment experience? He probably that's just his personality, and it's an aspect of it." I know people who have these very balanced personalities, just born that way. They
Yep.
manifest that balance,
Yep.
emotional balance.
Yep.
But there's this idea that it can be arrived at. And to your
Right.
point, we
Right.
don't know what another person's brain is experiencing, that quality.
No.
We only
No.
have access to our. So how do these religions or spiritual paths make these assertions that yes, this is possible for people, or
Sure.
you know, then so are we then excluding bipolar people? Are we saying,
Sure.
oh, it's possible for people, but just not the bipolar ones, right?
Sure. I think there's an interesting reality to mental variety within religious settings. I know that in America, if a Christian preacher comes out as having a mental illness, he's no longer allowed to be a preacher, which is fascinating. And I know that in Buddhism, in Theravadan Buddhism, there's a recommendation that people with psychosis do not practice meditation. So there's a response to it, but it's never it's always sort of an exclusion of that kind of phenomena, not an inclusion of. And that's okay too. Like, you know, if we take bell curve as a phenomena, and there's going to be fringes and there's going to be mass. And so, but I agree with your point. Like, who can know that anybody can achieve anything? Like, who can actually know that? And the business side of that always feels a little evil. Like, here's a promise. It's like, really? How do we know? How do we even know that you have it to promise, let alone I can be promised it? You know, like it all just feels very shady at that level, where religion is always making a promise. And it's kind of like, well, if it works for you personally and you can make it work, I have nothing against that. But if we start telling everybody, look, this can happen for you, it's like we all can't even see what the other person's looking at. I can't even see behind me. Like in a Douglas Harding headless way kind of thing. Like I know you're not looking at the window I'm looking at right now. We don't even see each other's faces right now. So consciousness by itself is having a private experience phenomenologically. And then socially, you get these promises, and these promises end up being businesses. If I look really closely, it's always a business. And so it's like, I just call racket and ignore it myself.
I mean, if I really think about it, this could just be one really prolonged psychotic episode I'm having, and you don't exist, and I'm talking to myself, right? To
Well,
this guy named Jack or Ben.
to your point, I actually think existence is a psychotic episode, and culture is how people try to deal with it.
Yeah, yeah. It seems like culture is the coping mechanism, right? And this is what
Yes.
I try
Yes.
to bring the attention to, is that the reason you guys are congregating in groups, this is really a support group. This whole
Yes.
satsang
Yes.
is a support group for
Yes.
people with similar symptoms, trying to get together to make each other feel better and sort of, you know, egg each other, encourage each other on the way through life, and say, you're not alone. It's okay. We're all in this together. Except they're putting the spin of we're superior to the rest of the world, which is
Right.
where the dishonesty comes in for me.
Yeah, I agree. It's a nonsensical thing to apply superiority. I don't think it's nonsensical to say we can get together and just help each other calm down and be present. I don't think that's nonsensical. But I think any kind of promise ends up being a little nonsensical. But again, I don't actually know. I don't know the mental reality of anybody else. So I can't exclude that it's possible, equanimity for someone. I can't exclude that. But I agree that I can't also know for sure what it means. I won't know it for myself, as far as I know historically. I won't know equanimity because the chemical reality of the flip-flopping will just continue to take place. The
So,
medicine, the medicine I take helps with the audio. I have audio hallucinations if I don't take an antipsychotic. So it helps with the voices. And that's the main thing that I notice it helps with, but it doesn't help with the high and the low or the Superman kryptonite thing.
so what kind of enlightenment would be possible for Ben?
This one.
So would you then say that, you know, all these ideas of enlightenment being propagated by the industry. These are wholesale versions of enlightenment, which are impractical because they don't take into account the individual quality, the individual brain chemistry, all of that, right? There are some people who will always suffer in a sense, right? You're going to have your manic and your depressive episodes, more on the manic side than depressive. You're going to try and cope with it. You're going to try and manage it with medication, but you've somewhat accepted this is kind of life for Ben,
Yes.
right? Until the day Ben's no longer.
Right.
But within that story, within that setup, within the odds and of the game that being stacked against you differently than it might be stacked against someone else, then enlightenment comes down to something that has absolutely nothing to do with the conditions, right?
Well, I don't, the word enlightenment feels really tricky because it always is, it's always meant getting off the wheel of spiritual rebirth. It's been westernized and distorted into a kind of state of continual emotional continuity. But I think if we use the word as we mean it, I don't believe in enlightenment. That doesn't make any sense. I don't believe in spirit.
Yeah, so it seems like what this modern spiritual culture has done is created a hybrid.
Yes.
Out of the Western enlightenment, which happened, a few hundred years ago, when there was this idea of the birth of reason within society, and what the ideas that spawned. And then they've taken the idea of Eastern enlightenment, say, okay, let's mash these together, have them have a bastard baby, get rid of the part where there's rebirth because we can't possibly keep sort of reinforcing reincarnation, and then call it something highly diluted, like,
yes,
hey, this is as it is, and if you see that, that's enlightenment.
Well, like you said, it's colonial appropriation of something that wasn't even theirs. And then it's turned into the life, liberty, pursuit of happiness kind of modality or manifest destiny or whatever you want to call it. But it's not, we're not actually talking about enlightenment when you talk about it as a state of emotion. We're talking about never being reborn again. That's not even a real thing because there's no spiritual entity inside the body. It's just not even real. It's just magical thinking. So I can't even imagine what enlightenment is, other than to feel like if it's anything, it's got to be this. But that's my Western slant on it. Even when I say that, I'm just saying it from the Western point of view. This is it. But that doesn't mean shit, really. This is it.
Well, and even if people believed in reincarnation, let's say there's a subset of people out there who do.
Sure, there's a lot.
Spiritual people tend to be highly sort of immediate gratification oriented to begin with. So they're not great at investing money and all of that, thinking about 30 years in the future. I highly doubt they're that fucking concerned about the next lifetime coming up and how bad that's going to be. Most people are concerned with the here and now and the problems they have. So I don't see this motivation to get off the wheel of rebirth being much of a motivator for people to become enlightened. I think that's the cop-out. That's a bullshit reason given by our people who are trying to take the old texts and apply it to themselves. It has no relevance really in their life. I think most people just want to find a way not to feel bad anymore. It comes down to that simple, right? It's a combination of self-improvement versus this promise of I don't need to suffer as much. And so enlightenment really then becomes a strategy for coping / bypassing, depending on which way one's going.
Yeah, again, if I'm using the term and I take it away from the Hindu Buddhist cosmology, I don't even know what I mean. I have no idea what enlightenment means, separate from the Buddhist definition. In Buddha was in reaction to Hinduism. But now we're just talking about magical thinking, and I just can't make any of that actually true.
Yeah, in my first book, I wrote about this this course I took in college. It was a course in artificial intelligence, and our prof made the statement on the blackboard. He said, "Is a snark a bijam or a bujam?" Okay, this is the question. 3 nonsensical words, and based on that, if you assume one statement to be true, let's say snark is a bijam, you can then extrapolate a whole host of ideas from that one assumption,
right?
And then create this whole narrative about snarks and bijams and bujams, and none of them make any sense. And so this whole idea of enlightenment seems to be predicated on that first assumption that it's a thing, right?
Yep, yep,
That
yep,
nobody
yep,
really questions.
yep. That's it. The minute I think it's a thing, it's exactly like I'm thinking Santa's at the North Pole with elves. Like it just feels like I'm just making something magical, trying to make it true. And I think if anyone thinks it through, they just go, this is crazy. Like this is just nonsensical. But then, I mean, who am I to say things are crazy? So I just stay away from it all and just try to like avoid using those terms that don't make sense to me. But I used to use them because I used to think I knew what it meant, but it was always in that Western view of it's this kind of continual happiness or it's always bliss or whatever. And it's like, I don't know that. And it's not my experience. Consciousness feels interesting because that feels like present. Like right now, the listener, you and me, right? Like whatever consciousness is feels like that's on. And I don't know much about that either, but at least I can use that word in lowercase c especially and feel like, okay, I kind of know what I mean. But I don't know what enlightenment means at all. If it's not the Hindu Buddhist concept, I have no idea what it means.
Yeah, and to be honest with you, like the word consciousness itself doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to me, because if I just reflect on what's going on right now between us, I find myself immersed in this conversation to the point where A, I'm not thinking about what I'm going to say next.
Perfect.
B, I don't really feel that there's two people talking. There's a conversation happening, and I'm watching this conversation happen.
So there's
And
wait. Can I just flag that? So that there's two people talking and you're watching. So would you say that's three people?
well, again, I don't know, because that now, that's me watching the person watching the two people talking. So there's four people. because that's the only way to use language, right? To sit outside of the phenomenon.
Right, that's the Beejum Boojum snark idea.
Yeah,
that's fun. Oh, I love that. That's fun.
But that's what I mean is, even
right.
to talk about consciousness, you need to create a second person entity talking about the consciousness.
Okay. I mean, I can,
Right?
yeah, because I've blacked out before, and so I know this isn't that. So I think I might mean lowercase c consciousness, non-blackout. Like whatever
Yes.
this is as close to the, but I agree that I don't know much more than being able to say that right there. And I only knew I blacked out because consciousness came back. But there's a distinct, like, wasn't actually conscious at all. And I'm not talking about deep sleep. I'm talking about a different state. So it's like, okay, this is not that state. Since I have that state in my memory, this is something quite extraordinary, actually, even if it's totally ordinary and the dog has it and the cat has it, etc., or is it, or whatever.
But it's almost like you need that memory to reflect on.
Well, yeah, all I
the
am is
fact
memory.
that, right.
All
Yeah,
I am, I'm memory,
we can't
and
even,
whatever this is.
and we don't even know if whatever we're experiencing right now isn't memory, but just from a split second ago, right?
Sure, right. I would imagine this isn't memory, personally. Like, I know I don't remember talking with you. So, but can I prove it? No, I can't prove it. But I'm pretty sure that I'm sitting here at the edge of history. Yeah, I'm pretty sure. Like, I would put all my eggs in, I know I don't remember this, and this is the edge of the universe's history.
What's fascinating is that there's like a million different ways to talk about this.
Of course.
None of them is true by any stretch of imagination.
No.
Perspective of it, right?
Yeah. Well, it's not an English universe. I mean, it gets even, it's this language. It gets language gamey in a certain way because it's not an English universe. So now what are we doing? Like, oh, wow, fun. That's where music feels like so valuable. If there wasn't music, oh, God, damn, this place would suck.
Well, I saw a recent post of yours where you've been through a particularly deep funk, and you mentioned you were listening to rap, and then you composed a little one of your own, which I really enjoyed reading, because it was I could almost experience what you were experiencing as you wrote that.
Oh, cool.
But yeah, tell me about that. Like, how does music save your soul in those moments?
Because it's non-conceptual. So it has a whole world of its own, but there's just something about, yeah, it's a whole other world. I can't really play with it linguistically, but Ba-da-ba-da-bum, bum, bum, ba-dum, boom, 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 ba-da-ba-da-ba-dum, bum, bum, boom. Ba-dum, boom, boom, boom. But I think back to Yuji, who said music is bullshit. And every now and then, I really want to know what he meant because I don't know what he meant.
I think a lot of things came out of Yuji's mouth that he might have regretted later on. I think he said a lot of things just to be a little bit provocative, to be honest with you.
Okay, so he just took like the most beautiful thing in the world and shit on it. That's pretty awesome.
Well, that's what he tended to do, right? Just shit on things.
Yeah, I only know him from the writing, but it's really funny to be like, music is bullshit. Well, hold on, let me at least try that on. What? But I don't know.
Well, and then didn't he say something about money being divine and you should seek to maximize it?
Right. That's hilarious.
Well, and
but
that's
probably,
the other thing.
He might not be wrong. I mean, that seems to be what people are doing subconsciously anyway.
Well, and that's the other thing is that you have a phenomenon like a lot of the spiritual teachers and gurus and all of that, and then you have the other phenomenon on the other side of the anti-gurus, people like Yuji who were very drastically on the other side, and then people are like, oh yeah, that guy must have the answers because he seems to be so opposed to everything. And it sounds radical enough that it must be true. And when I look at most of these guys, I'm like, nobody has domain on the truth. Why are we constantly propagating this idea that somebody has access or somebody controls the territory that is truth? Totally, and now they're going to give out little parcels of land to people who are, like nobles. I give you Essex, or I give you Essex, right? That's so awesome. As if you're some sort of king who has access. I don't think anybody does, and that's what is so beautiful about being human is the degree of uncertainty that we live in. Yeah. That we then try to manage depending on the various levels of courage we're able to manifest in our lives by creating concessions in which we create mini delusions of certainty to combat that uncertainty.
Well, the term we ends up being 7.9 billion plus or minus alive while we're talking. Yeah. So my knowledge about we is immediately the ignorance. Like I don't even know about we. Because that's still just my memory of what I think people are, etc. I don't know about we at all. As an object in reality, I don't know what we is.
I draw again, these conclusions are not definitive, but just observations from behavior, right? Sure. When I look at 7.9 plus or minus people participating in a culture that is delusional. So either they're doing it for the pure fun of it, because it's a game to them. Doesn't seem like that because they're tremendous actors if they are, because they seem to really go through the whole gamut of emotions, suffering and all of that.
Wait, but does this feel historical? When you think of this, does this feel historical relative to your own education, which obviously isn't omniscient?
What do you mean by does it feel historical?
Like as you use the data you have to make the statement, does it feel obvious that you're actually missing data?
Yes, of course.
Okay, cool. Me too. Yeah, me too.
Yes, no. By these are very sort of broad generalizations.
Yeah.
I have no access to how the small village out somewhere. How the fuck do I know? I have no idea. I can only go by my own experience.
How the fuck do I know? That's it. How the fuck do I know? How the fuck do I know? I don't know.
But for example, I'll give you an example.
Sure.
When I first moved to Japan, right? I was like, I lived up in the northern island of Hokkaido for a total of 8 years with my family. And I was expecting this, magical land of Japanese history and samurai and all this shit. I landed up there, very soon those idealistic blinkers came off and I started seeing that, these are just people, same people that I've seen everywhere in India where I grew up, in the Middle East where I live, or America, Canada, and Japanese people are just people. They have different cultures or whatever. But I do these English classes, these conversation classes, and Japanese students would come and there were older people typically who were having these conversation classes. A lot of them retired. They would just like bare their soul to me and talk about their, my mom was like this as a child, my dad was like this is what my husband does and my wife does. Partly because in their culture they don't have the capacity or ability to communicate their personal grievances. They're just not culturally allowed to do that. But what that revealed to me, I'm like, holy shit, you guys have the exact same problems people back home have. And you have the same worries, the same fears. So those kind of experiences then lead me to extrapolate. And I know I'm making a big leap of assumption here by doing that most of that 7.9 billion people on the planet potentially operate in that way, right?
Yeah, I couldn't make that leap, but I can understand the attempt. Because I know immediately I don't see the data. Oh, it doesn't matter. This just becomes like, I can never prove to myself that I know what we is, since I only have historical mind. And historical mind isn't present mind, so it's immediately ignorant of current data. Like if you go to a bookstore or the library and you stand outside, right before you walk in, everything in the bookstore is missing everything behind you. That kind of like the data, I can't keep up with the changes in the data, but I hear you about patterns and habits and generalities. I agree that those can be played with. But if I really think about it, golly, I'm so stupid, fundamentally, like ignorant, in a good way, like in a really peaceful way, about the world, definitely about 7.9 billion separate objects.
This seems like a cultural influence. That we're talking about my tendency to extrapolate based on a small sample population. It's almost like I'm a political polling station, right? Like I'm polling a small sample set and making these claims about how the vaster population is operating.
And I was going to say, I don't think you're inaccurate either, because there's something about law of large numbers where this does actually work in a certain way. Like if you get a big enough sample and you take a small percentage of it, chances are you're not that far off. So maybe it actually is relatively accurate. I just don't know myself.
We've seen in American politics how absolutely and totally wrong polls can be. So there's that, right? There's the over emphasis and importance given to extrapolating data. I think extrapolating data helps give some sort of a benchmark to understanding the world, but it's not knowing the world, right? There's
I'm just modeling it.
Absolutely. And that's it. And this is what I try to communicate when I write is spiritual teachers are modeling reality.
Yep.
They're creating and they're communicating that model and hoping it somewhat approximates, but they have no idea.
Sure. They might know for them in the way that Disneyland is Disneyland, or Knott's Berry Farm, or Magic Mountain, or, the Raging Waters, or you get an amusement park, you walk through the gate, and the amusement park is designed so that you go on an experience of some sort. And I imagine each person, spiritual teacher or not, is that kind of thing if I'm willing to actually walk through the gate. The challenge, of course, is how much is the ticket?
And are they going to let me know that this is an amusement park?
Right. Well, I better know that ahead of time. I put the onus for that on me. Like if I'm being fooled, that's not their fault.
I place the responsibility on all parties, because I feel like everyone's playing a role in this delusion, right? If either side refused to play anymore, the whole thing would fall apart. The amusement park wouldn't function.
Right.
You can't function an amusement park with the customers, and you cannot function it without the people working the amusement park.
Right.
So the responsibility lies on both sides. And so while I try to critique the industry and the teachers and all that, I also try to critique seekers and be like, what the fuck are you guys doing? Like, you don't have to buy into this stuff and try to read between the lines. How did that? Go ahead.
Oh, funny. No, go ahead.
I was going to ask you at what point that clicked for you, or had that always clicked? Right,
well, if we go back to our first point, which is that there's a sentence that comes along and changes your view. I don't know if someone who's seeking something and someone who's offering something isn't within the potential to create that same experience. So if someone says, well, I want to follow so-and-so and I'm going to go study all that they wrote and I'm going to go hang out with them, I can't say that isn't positive and I can't say that's negative. I can only say, well, the potential exists for that to quote unquote work for that person. So for me, it clicks for me in that I always was resistant to school. And I was very lucky. Like I learned early on, like people really don't know, like nobody knows. And this is just, I can't say it in the end, it's a contradiction, but for me, I kind of go, look, most people don't know, to the point where I'm going to follow them. I'm going to do my own thinking. Well, and then I learn I don't know. And I really don't know, because the more you think, obviously, the dumber you get in a good way. So it's like, I kind of always had a resistance to authority, but I got lucky. I went to an ashram when I was young, 19 years old, in California, and the leader of the ashram was a terrible human being. And I was just like, this is crazy, this whole thing. I got really lucky because I went looking for a guru and I found that there's probably no such thing, because this person was in charge and they weren't very nice at all. And I was like, no, this is nonsense. This is all nonsense. So I just got lucky in the end. I did go looking and I didn't find what I was looking for. Hallelujah.
Yeah, and it seems like, this is a phenomenon not just limited to the spiritual industry. It's pretty much prevalent everywhere. It's why we have political leaders and we give them the power to tell us what to do and make the laws that guide us and, make our decisions for us for the most part, right? It seems like
it's super complicated.
Seems like most people instinctively sense that they don't know, which is a good thing. On the flip side of it, they seem convinced that there are people who do know.
Sure. Well, it's hard to imagine that no one knows. That's a leap. I mean, that's a big leap to finally go, you know what? I bet all of humanity is completely ignorant to the nature of its own experience. Like, that's a big leap.
But wouldn't you say it's an even bigger leap to believe that the nature of this experience, which is so vast and, I mean, mind-bogglingly unfathomable,
well,
is knowable?
Well, I think of it like, if I'm 6 years old and I'm trying to cross a freeway, is it easier if someone who's lived a while comes along and takes my hand and helps me run across? Or is it easier if I just go for it? And to me, this is like our relationship to terror at being alive determines how we go about crossing through life itself. So some people have a terror threshold where they're like, I can do this. I'm cool. I can do this. Other people, it's like, oh, I need a posse with me. I need an entourage. I need a leader. I need a guideline. I need a railing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't think terror is equal either. I think terror thresholds change for people. And I wouldn't fault anyone who wants a hand to hold, in the same way that I wouldn't, necessarily. Well, I think I do admire the people who don't want a hand to hold, but I wouldn't fault anyone who wants a guideline if they're trying to climb Mount Everest. Because I think existence ends up being terrifying. Like, this is terrifying if we really are honest, because we seemingly know we don't survive, and that's hard to stomach. Which is why I think we make up magical thinking. I mean, I think afterlife and magical worlds ends up being a response to our intelligence and nothing else. We're fucked.
The difference between the crossing the road scenario and crossing life, for lack of a better phrase,
sure.
is that when the child holds the adult's hand, they are convinced that the adult knows how to cross a road, right? And in that case, the adult does know how to cross it. Now, if the child was to later find out that, holy fuck, this adult had no idea the entire time, they were fucking winging it and hoping not to get hit by a car, and I allowed them to hold my hand, that would be more akin to what's happening with people who presume to inform people how to cross life, right? Like that whole journey of life is assuming that you can see the highway, you can anticipate the vehicles, all that chaos is perfectly within your control because you have mastered the art of crossing the highway. That's the most adults actually have. Now, if an adult was lying, then that's a problem, right? Because if they have no idea how to cross that fucking thing, and they're grabbing hold of children and taking them across, you would say, hey, that's an irresponsible thing to do.
Right. Well,
so that's what I mean by knowing practical things is possible. but we're not talking about practical things, right? Practical things are the activities and functions we've imposed upon this unknowable life to cope with it. Right? We've created these little hierarchies of functions and processes, and that's what we call culture. That's what we call civilization. And as a group, it tends to keep us alive a bit longer than maybe our ancestors could stay alive. But we're going beyond that now. We're going beyond the borders of what we have overlaid reality with to what is reality?
Yeah, well, it depends on who you ask. My favorite reality, at least as far as I can tell, is that nobody has mine. So I don't have to, it's not a question I actually have for anyone alive. My favorite thought experiment is, if everyone suddenly died, what would actually change? If I was suddenly on Earth, planet, and I was here and the sun was out and, you know, everyone was suddenly gone, what actually changes about my actual experience?
Well, you wouldn't have
I can't
access
really,
to your medication then, which
sure, but I mean, I can't actually imagine many things changing, except I'd have to suddenly watch out for packs of dogs. Otherwise, I'm food, water, shelter, and I'm watching out for the weather like I do now. So if humans feel extra, like that people are here feels like, wow, this is so entertaining. But in terms of phenomenological experience, I don't think people are necessary. I think we're privately all alive, and it's just super shocking.
and it seems like 99% of what we're trying to know is really around the human interaction level. It really has nothing to do with life itself.
Totally.
We say we're seeking truth, but we're really seeking a better way to interact with each other, because they've got this weird thing called civilization overlaying what our organism is naturally designed to adapt to. And that's causing most of the psychological pain and suffering that people are trying to transcend. Right?
Like you said, hell is other people. Or Sartre said that. Well,
I won't take credit for that.
Yeah, no, but I mean, like you brought up,
Right.
There's a funny, like, if I'm willing to leave the campfire and the edges of the light, then maybe I really do discover things that are incredible about being alive. But if I can only hang out where everyone's hanging out, if I can only stay close to the group, there's some beautiful things there too. But I might not discover, because this sets it up like it's some kind of thing. I don't want to do that. But it's just, I noticed that if I aim for autism, not enlightenment, I really do find something about what I'm looking for.
Well, it's because what's the reality that's in your face? Is it the tribal reality? And that's that's the constant feedback you get the moment you're with other people. I noticed this in myself, right? Let's say I'll have dinner and friends over for dinner. And in that moment, as we're engaging, I mean, that's a completely different reality, because it becomes the consensus of the group and the things we're discussing and the ideas and all of that. And you step out for some fresh air into, a quiet, peaceful evening, and you're looking at the trees, and you're just immediately transported completely different reality.
Yeah.
And you're a different person in those two realities.
Yep.
You're not even a person in the second reality. You're just this witness of trees. In the first reality, you're this actively involved member of that group and that tribal reality.
Right.
And I think stepping away from that is where life starts becoming absurd, because this is what Camus talks about is, when you grasp the absurdity of life, the question becomes, why am I not killing myself? Right? He asked that question. He actually asked that question, like, why shouldn't I kill myself?
Right.
and the paradoxical response to that becomes tremendously life affirming as you read on. And actually most of the existentialists, Nietzsche as well, tremendously life affirming if you read that in the right lens. But it seems like there's no way to skirt nihilism to get to that life-affirming state.
Well, there's Emil Cioran, he's a Romanian Parisian thinker, and he has this beautiful line, which is, why bother killing yourself since you always do it too late?
I'm very familiar with him because my wife is Romanian, and my father-in-law, her biological dad, who lives in Germany, has all his books, man. he only reads Emile Cioran.
Oh, he's got great sentences because he was an aphoristic thinker, which is kind of my kind of style, and I just love some of his sentences. They're really beautiful. But that one really helps a lot. Like he says, only optimistic people kill themselves because but why bother? Because it's like you're too involved in either direction. Trying to make life beautiful, trying to make life ugly. It's like it's too involved either way. He's helped me a little bit in that. And like Zazen, Zazen is being alone. Like you can go out into the wilderness, or you can just sit and stare at the wall. And I find, having been out in the wilderness alone by myself and sitting and staring at the wall, that they kind of do induce the same sort of just patient animal confidence.
Well, that's a very good point, because animals don't kill themselves because they're not optimistic either.
Right, exactly.
They don't hope, and so they're
Nope.
not disappointed. Their
Nope.
expectations are never fall short of what reality is. And it seems like that is always what people like Cioran and the Stoics as well try to orient people's perspectives towards, forget about what you want out of reality, what you hope out of reality, and all of that shit.
Yeah.
And try to just look at what's going on, because you're going to be dead soon. You'll never get this opportunity again.
Yeah.
Don't waste it. Just go
right.
along with whatever's happening.
Yeah. Well, yeah, the amor fati idea, the carpe diem idea.
So would you say that's more of what your experience and how you kind of approach, the challenges that you have with your bipolar condition and all of that, as opposed to 10 years ago when we met and you were very much a part of the scene and holding up the sign?
Sure, right. Yeah, now it's just I'm my desires and my thoughts are my job. And before I would think I was trying to help people with their desires and thoughts, but now it's just my own desires and my own thoughts. That's my job. And as best as I can, I've made it this far, so it's working to the degree that it's working. And yeah, I was feeling like shit earlier, and I'm laying on my back on the floor the whole time we're talking, so I'm feeling pretty shavasana, which is nice. And I'm enjoying.
You sounded kind of horizontal to me.
Yeah, I'm enjoying.
Either lighter the better.
I'm enjoying the conversation, and it's fun to. I love realizing the uncertainty / ignorance of my own perspective, and any kind of chutzpah or gall I would have at trying to make some kind of claim about reality for someone else. I just love learning I can't do that it's impossible, and it's actually exhausting. That I'll never know for others what it's like to be them, so I don't even have to like make an effort and an attempt in any way to try to come up with some kind of position for someone else. I can barely do it for myself.
And the question is, why though? Why would any of us, and I'm guilty of this because I do it in my writing. I do it to some extent to generalize about people. And part of it is because I enjoy writing and I want to engage with people. So, there's a selfish motivation there. But then I sometimes ask myself, why the fuck do I care about what's going on with anybody? Whether they're happy, whether they're sad, whether they're exploiting other people.
Right.
Yeah, I mean,
do you get an answer?
I like my life. No, I know there's no answer, because I know why the fuck I'm doing it. I'm doing it because I'm adding, I'm always adding something on top of what's necessary, okay? The whole motivation for doing anything in my life is to add something that I know at the end will lack substance, because all the substance I need is already right here. And that's why I'm content with life as it is. And yet there's this part of my personality, or that's always trying to grow one extra thing out of the soil that already is growing things naturally. You want to plant one extra thing. I acknowledge that. I don't judge it. I don't try to change it. I don't want to now not do it because I see it. I get, it's entertainment at some level for me. It adds a bit of spice to a humdrum day, right? Like, for example, you and I chatting right now. I have a regular work day that follows a certain pattern. And suddenly there's a conversation with Ben thrown right into the middle of that. And what fun, right? So it's kind of like that. It's just like do something different, something enjoyable. But I don't take it as very much more than that.
Do you have any, because you're a father, correct?
Yes.
So do you have interest in being replicated?
Like my kids to be like me?
Yeah, or just anybody to actually, like, can you find any part of you that's like, because I find this in myself, like there is a kind of mimetic copying device within me that is interested slightly in being immortal, or as I think Ernest Becker, you know, the immortality formula and the
Yes.
denial of death he talks about. So it's like there is this like, well, if I'm doing something awesome and it feels awesome for me, I can actually find where I would hope someone else feels something similar to that. Not that they replicate completely, but there is a little bit of this replication urge. And I'm just curious, when you look inside, or we'll look outside, or however you think about it, do you find anything like that in your writing, in your intent, etc.? Like,
Yeah,
is
well,
there
now
any
that, yeah,
replication urge?
yeah, now that you mention it, like I hate it when somebody tries to sound like me. It fucking pisses me off to no extent. Okay, because I hate it in other people when I see it with other spiritual teachers and their followers sounding like that. It really bugs me. And I try to like cut that off, you know, nip it in the bud as when I find, because I want people to be true to their own expression, not try to be like me. I really, that bugs me. But what I do, yes, there's one, the aspect where, you know, somebody snaps out of that delusion of, you know, this teacher is going to be give me this. If I see, you know, as a result of whatever they're going through, they snap out of it, it's like, oh yeah, that's great that you experienced that, because I experienced that too. So there is a sort of, I'm glad you experienced that.
Hmm.
Do I want it replicated? Not necessarily. Like at the end of the day, to be honest with you, you know, I get, you know, people who write to me like, oh, your book helped me so much. It's great. You know, I read it. It feels nice for all of 3.5 seconds, and I forget about it. Like it's
Right,
not something that really, oh, I made a difference. Somebody's like, not at
right.
all. With my kids, no, I really appreciate when they're different from me for some reason.
Oh,
I
cool.
really appreciate those. I do like the parts that, you know, are similar in the sense of like a sense of humor and things like that. I'm like, I'm glad you have a sense of humor. But when it comes to like my older daughter's, she's got this tremendous gymnastic ability. I don't know why, because I come from a family of couch surfers, right? I don't know how she got, and I'm just amazed. I'm like, wow, that's tremendous that you have that. That's so
Hmm.
cool. I wonder which ancestor had those genes, right?
Hmm. That's cool.
Did you experience that with yourself then, when you were more active publicly and, you know, lots of people following you and hearting your posts? And
Well,
that's,
like you said, you know, like if someone was copying directly, it was kind of like, no, that's not the point. But I imagine it like if I make a good meal, the replication of a good meal is another good meal. So I can find, even now, like if I go to my support group and I'm sharing something that works for me, if someone comes back and they say, oh, I tried that thing and it really does work, and thank you so much for sharing that, there's a sense of like communal growth. Like you were talking about, you want to do something new each day that helps you grow. Well, I think there's a sense of communal growth that can happen if we're not directly copying each other, but we're also giving the community the best thing we have to offer. So I can find that in myself even now. And I don't think of it as a negative thing. I do find it curious, given that eventually anything that can be replicated disappears forever, that there still is the sense of, this still is a nice feeling. It still is an urge in a certain way. Even someone listening now, like if they walk away from the conversation and they feel something from it that is not necessarily positive or negative, but useful, I feel good about that. I feel of service. But if it was just a dead blank, I don't think I would care in the end. But I can feel the like positive sensation of, yeah, I hope someone finds this useful. But I don't hope to the point of suffering. You know, I just hope in the way that it feels really absurd if it's complete null.
yes, I agree with you. And there's a positive feedback mechanism that, and that's how I feel about these podcasts. Like, let's say they just fell flat and nobody gave a shit about them. I don't know if I'd keep scheduling them, right? At the end of the day, I
Right.
don't want to just create videos of myself to watch later on.
Right.
Right? Because
Right.
I'm doing that anyways in daily life. But when I see, like, you know, people find it useful or whatever, but I think there's a balance between that and then trying to be of use.
Sure. No, I agree. If they're striving, then I don't believe me. But if there's a genuine desire for the community as a whole, to be elevated, then I kind of trust that. But it's a tricky line, what decides that. But if I'm striving to be useful, then what's going on? What am I imagining other people are doing that they need my help so much that I believe I'm so helpful, et cetera, et cetera? Like that just feels like I'm in a delusion.
So your experience of going to NAMI and your support group?
Yeah.
That's the sense of community you're talking about.
Yeah, well, it's a really powerful and beautiful thing to be with peers, because there's no there's a facilitator, but it's always, everyone has a diagnosis. You're just sitting around. There's a format to it that also helps me a lot. Like I don't, it's not chaotic. It's one person at a time. Then there's feedback, and then the next person, you sit in a circle. Like I just enjoy the overall reality of showing up every week and hearing about these people's lives, for 3 years now. And it's just, there's something so beautiful about it. It's not satsang, but it's close to the same sort of dialogic kind of communal feeling. It's just like this conversation. It's just with like 16 other people. It's just everyone's expressing where they're at for the day, and then we move on, and there's a thank you and a how about this, and maybe try this, and different things that people mention. But overall, it's just love, and love feels really important. Just basic love, lowercase L. I'm a big fan of
lowercase everything these days.
I have to lowercase everything because I think the uppercase is dangerous.
Some people just write in full caps.
Yeah, right. It might be the same thing in the end, but I like the lowercase everything.
So in NAMI, is there some sort of, similar to AA has some kind of a 12-step program or some basic underlying philosophy? There's
principles of support, and they're available on any website. It's a national organization in America anyway. And so there's principles of support. There's sort of how you go about structuring the meeting and what we kind of try to aim for in terms of values, but there's no steps. And that part I like a lot. Like there's no like, and then you do this, and then you're trying to get here. So it's, because otherwise that feels like the same thing in the spiritual industry. It's like, no, I don't want steps. I just want us as honest as we can all be. And that feels like what I get when I go there, and what I learn when I'm there, and who I hear when I'm there. And they let me sit on the floor. Like everybody else is in a chair, but I hate chairs. So they let me sit on the floor, and that feels so beautiful. I get to be myself.
It seems like, your NAMI group is more true to the idea of what a spiritual group ought to be about than any satsang out there.
Well,
because
yeah.
That's what it's really about. If people are going to be meeting, and satsang meaning organizing a group around the discussion of truth, then it's not truth with this capital T, but it's, well, what am I experiencing right now?
Yep,
and we're trying to sustain each other with our own stories and experiences. Right?
Yeah, that's the beauty of it. And lives that I would never consider, and experiences that I've never gone through. It's just a learning curve every time. And it's really sweet. They're really sweet people. I feel very lucky. They're all over the country. I've thought of joining one in New York, even though I'm out here, because you're Zooming now. So it'd be fun to join another one that's so far away from where I'm at. Anyway, I might do that, but for right now, it's all good. There's just 2 a week, and I go to both of those.
And do people go to the support group with some sort of expectation of some kind of outcome they're going
Not
to
that I notice.
Mm-hmm.
I really notice it, like everyone fundamentally kind of uses it as a coping skill. But I don't think there's any kind of gaining behavior. In the way that when you go into a spiritual setup, the idea is that eventually you arrive. I don't feel like anybody thinks they arrive. It's more like you said, just sharing the story and being a part of the overall community.
And I feel like, that loss of community is very closely tied into why the spiritual industry is alive and thriving today, because it is the decoy that promises you everything that community wants you to provide people. When we actually lived in these small villages, and people took care of each other and each other's families and all of that. That is true spirituality. That is as human as spirituality gets, and as meaningful as it can get for me. It's nothing metaphysical.
Right. Tribe.
Yeah. And it's taken me moving to the west coast of Canada and living in a small town here and becoming part of a small community that somehow, appeared around the school that our kids go to. And I realize that it's only at the age of 40 now that I truly am experiencing what it feels like to be a part of a community.
Right,
And I've
right,
lived all over the world,
right,
and I've
right,
never felt this,
right.
where
That's
I
awesome.
care about somebody else's kids almost as
Congratulations.
much as I care about my own, because
Yeah,
I'm watching out for them constantly. And I know their parents are watching out for mine.
yeah. That's really beautiful.
It's such a beautiful thing.
Well, it's just tribe. I mean, I think there's such a, if I'm just in me, I'm missing out. And if I'm just in group, I'm missing out. So if I get to be an individual in a group, then that's the best it gets. A community of individuals sharing this funny ride we're on. Holy shit.
Yeah, and it seems like the opportunity for that gets missed out when you elevate any one individual of that
Yes,
group to like leader status.
totally. I totally agree. There's no teacher of reality. It's impossible.
This was a beautiful conversation, Ben. I really, truly enjoyed it, and I'm so glad we were able to make it happen. I had a sense that it would happen one way or another, but this is the best way that it could happen.
Well, I appreciate your persistence and encouragement. And it was, I really agree. I enjoyed it. And I just hope you have a beautiful day. And whoever's listening, I hope you have a beautiful day. And may life be however you wish it to be.